The marriage was signed before the sun had fully risen. There were no flowers, no music, no smiling relatives whispering good wishes. Only a narrow office in Somerset, a long wooden table, and two witnesses, who kept their eyes carefully on the paper instead of the couple sitting across from them. Genevieve Carlyle was 21 years old, and on that quiet October morning in 1812, she became the Duchess of Summerfield. She had imagined this moment many times in the weeks before it arrived. Each version had been colder than the last. Every whisper she had heard about the Duke had shaped the picture in her mind. A bitter man, a broken soldier, a widower who had returned from war with legs that no longer obeyed him and a temper that frightened even his servants. She had prepared herself to meet a monster. What she did not prepare for was the silence. Nicholas Windrest, the Duke of Summerfield, signed the marriage document with a steady hand. His face gave away nothing. He did not look at her once during the ceremony. His posture was straight in the wheelchair beside the table, controlled and quiet, in a way that felt heavier than anger. It was the stillness of someone who had already decided the world held nothing left to offer him. When the papers were finished, he gave a short nod to the witnesses. "That will be all." His voice was calm, low, perfectly polite. Then he turned his chair toward the door. The entire marriage had lasted less than 10 minutes. Genevieve watched him leave and felt a strange, unexpected thought move through her mind. That was not cruelty. That was surrender. 4 hours later, the carriage carrying the new Duchess rolled slowly through the gray countryside of Somerset. Rain streaked the window glass in soft lines. The sky had turned the pale color of early autumn fog. Inside the carriage, Genevieve sat very straight, with her hands folded neatly in her lap. She had promised herself one thing. She would not gasp when she saw Windrest Hall. The house appeared gradually through the mist like a stone ship rising from water. It was enormous. Tall gray walls climbed above carefully trimmed lawns. Iron gates stood open at the end of a sweeping gravel drive. The building had the kind of quiet authority that came from centuries of history. But what struck her most was not the size. It was the stillness. Nothing moved. No laughter drifted from the windows. No servants hurried across the steps. Even the air seemed to pause around the house, as if the place had been holding its breath for years. The carriage stopped. Her maid Clara touched her arm gently. "My lady, we have arrived." Genevieve stepped down onto the gravel. The cold October air settled instantly into her bones. She looked up at the great stone house and studied it carefully, the way a general studies a battlefield. Everything was perfect. The lawns were trimmed. The gravel drive was spotless. Not a single weed broke through the pale stones. Everything was maintained. But maintained like a museum. Precise. Untouched. As if no one had laughed inside these walls for a very long time. Her eyes moved to the windows. Almost every one of them was dark. Except two. At the far end of the ground floor, behind thick curtains, a faint golden light flickered softly. "He is there," she thought, "watching me arrive." And he did not come outside. Genevieve breathed slowly through her nose once, then lifted her chin and walked toward the front door. The housekeeper met her in the entrance hall. Mrs. Eldridge was a sturdy woman, with gray hair and observant eyes that suggested she had seen far more of life than she spoke about. She curtsied politely. "Lady Genevieve, welcome to Windrest Hall." There was a brief pause. "His Grace sends his apologies. He was detained." Genevieve smiled gently. It was not a social smile meant to impress. It was the quiet kind that said she understood more than people expected. "Of course," she said softly. May I be shown to my rooms first? I would like to change before dinner." Relief passed briefly across the housekeeper's face. The rooms prepared for her were beautiful. That was the second surprise. Her suite overlooked the eastern gardens, where rows of silver birch trees stretched toward the far edge of the estate. The bed was large, polished mahogany with soft ivory curtains. A fire had been lit recently in the fireplace, though the warmth had not yet fully reached the corners of the room. Genevieve stood in the center of the chamber after her maid left to unpack the trunks. He ordered the fire lit. He did not greet me, but he ordered the fire. The thought stayed with her. Windrest Hall was silent in a way that felt different from ordinary quiet houses. This was the silence of a place holding its breath. Later that evening, she found a small, folded card waiting on the writing desk. "Dinner is served at 7. Your presence is not required if you are fatigued from travel. W." She read the message twice. Your presence is not required, not welcome, not expected. Something stubborn stirred inside her chest. Dinner was at 7. She would be there 5 minutes early. She found him before dinner. Not intentionally. She had been searching for the library when she noticed the door slightly open at the end of the corridor. Warm candlelight spilled across the floor. Inside the room, a large desk stood near the fireplace, surrounded by towering shelves filled with books. And behind that desk sat the Duke of Summerfield, Nicholas Windrest. He was in a wheelchair. Genevieve had known this already. Her mother had mentioned it carefully when the marriage was arranged, but seeing it was different. He was younger than she expected, perhaps 32. Dark hair slightly unsettled, as though he had run a hand through it. Broad shoulders that hinted at the strength he must have once carried easily. His posture was completely still, controlled with a discipline that felt almost military. He looked up. His eyes were blue, deep blue, the kind of blue the sky turns before a storm begins. They studied her carefully. "Lady Genevieve." His voice was low and steady. "Your Grace." She stepped just inside the doorway, but did not move farther. "I apologize for interrupting. I was looking for the library." A pause. "You have found it," he said simply. She glanced at the shelves surrounding them. "It is remarkable." For a moment, something flickered across his expression. Then it disappeared. "Is there something you require?" "Yes," she thought. "I need to know who you are." Instead, she said politely, "A book." He studied her another moment before turning back to the papers on his desk. "South Wall," he said. "Fiction is arranged alphabetically." She found a novel. She left quietly, but she felt the exact moment his eyes lifted from the page to watch her leave. Dinner that evening was quiet. The table could have seated 20 people, but only the two of them sat at opposite ends, beneath the warm glow of candlelight. The meal was excellent: roast lamb, fresh bread, buttered vegetables. The Duke spoke twice, once to ask if the food was satisfactory, once to mention that rain was expected the following week. When the meal ended, he pushed his chair back from the table. "Good night, Lady Genevieve." "Good night, Your Grace." He left the room. Genevieve remained sitting at the table for a moment longer, listening to the quiet sound of his wheels rolling across the stone floor. She looked down at her glass of wine. She had expected loneliness. What she felt instead was something else: curiosity. She lifted her eyes toward the dark doorway where he had disappeared. "What broke you?" she wondered. "And why are you so determined that no one ever finds out?" Nicholas asked to see her the next morning. He did not send an invitation. He sent a request. Genevieve noticed the difference. Mrs. Eldridge delivered the message with a tray of tea, while gray rain tapped gently against the windows of her bedroom. His Grace would like to speak with you in the blue sitting room, my lady. Genevieve had already been awake for 2 hours. She had spent the early morning reading beside the fireplace while the house slowly woke around her. Windrest Hall moved quietly, like a place that had forgotten what it meant to be alive. By the time she walked down the staircase, the rain had turned the gardens outside into a pale watercolor of silver and gray. Nicholas was already waiting. He sat near the tall window of the blue room, looking out at the rain falling across the lawn. The light behind him painted his profile in calm shadow. When he heard her enter, he turned. "Please sit," he said. She sat across from him in one of the high-backed chairs. Nicholas did not waste time with pleasantries. "I would like to speak plainly," he said. Genevieve folded her hands neatly in her lap. "I appreciate honesty." "Our marriage," he continued, "is not something either of us chose." She nodded once. "That is true. I believe it would be best if our household operated with clear expectations." His voice remained calm, controlled. "You will manage the domestic matters of Windrest Hall as its mistress. Staff, correspondence, guests, social duties. The house will answer to you." That surprised her slightly, but she remained silent. "You will have access to the grounds, the stables, and the library. Your accounts will remain your own." He paused. "In return, I ask for one thing." She waited. "My privacy." Rain tapped softly against the window glass. "There are certain rooms, certain hours of the day, that are mine alone. I ask that those boundaries be respected without question." Genevieve studied him. "You practice this speech," she thought. "You expected me to argue." "I agree," she said simply. Nicholas blinked. "You agree?" "I do." She tilted her head slightly. "Your terms are reasonable. However, I have one condition of my own." Now his eyes sharpened. "And that is?" "The same privacy applies to me." He said nothing. "I will have rooms of my own, hours of my own, habits that I will not explain if I choose not to." She met his gaze calmly. "Mutual privacy, Your Grace. Not one direction." The silence stretched. Then something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile, the memory of one. "Agreed," he said. She stood. "Good. Then I believe I will explore the gardens this morning. It is raining. Then I will get wet." She moved toward the door. Halfway across the room, his voice stopped her. "Lady Genevieve." She turned. "The library," he said quietly. "You may use it whenever you wish." It was a small thing, but it felt like a door opening. "Thank you," she said. The following weeks settled into an unexpected rhythm. Genevieve managed the house. Each morning she met with Mrs. Eldridge to review the household accounts and plan meals. Letters from neighboring estates arrived regularly, invitations and inquiries. The new Duchess. She answered them politely. Nicholas spent most of his time in the library. He appeared for dinner some evenings. Other nights he did not. A tray was quietly delivered to his study, and Genevieve never commented on it. But she noticed things. She noticed 3 portraits in the east corridor had been turned to face the wall. She noticed there were no personal items in any of the common rooms, no books left open, no unfinished letters. Windrest Hall looked beautiful and empty, except for one thing. Every night, a single light burned in a ground floor room at the far end of the house. It stayed lit long after midnight. She never asked about it, but she always noticed. She found the greenhouse by accident. One afternoon, she had been walking along the garden wall, searching for the orchard gate, when she noticed a long glass building hidden behind climbing roses. The door stood slightly open. Warm air spilled into the cold autumn garden. She hesitated. Then she stepped inside. The warmth wrapped around her instantly. After weeks of cold stone hallways, the greenhouse felt almost alive. Plants filled every corner, fig trees in large pots, herbs growing in clay containers, tomato vines climbing carefully tied wires. Everything was thriving. Someone cared for this place deeply. She was studying a row of orchids when the door opened behind her. She turned. Nicholas sat in the doorway. For a moment, his expression was completely unguarded. Surprise. Then the familiar calm returned. "Lady Genevieve." "Your Grace." She stood straight, but did not apologize. "I found the greenhouse by accident." He moved his chair slowly inside. "I tend the plants here myself." His voice carried a quiet edge, territorial. She looked at the orchids again. "This one is recovering," she said, pointing gently to a pale flower with fresh green leaves. He stopped beside the bench. "You recognize that?" "It was overwatered," she said softly. "The roots nearly rotted." Silence filled the warm room. "Nearly," Nicholas said. She realized he was watching her hands. She had touched one of the leaves lightly without thinking. She pulled her hand back. "I will not return without permission." She turned toward the door. "The yellow flowers," he said suddenly. She paused. "They are St. John's wort. Mrs. Eldridge dries them for medicine." She looked back. "That is kind of you." He did not answer, but he did not ask her to leave either. She stayed another 20 minutes while he worked with the plants. They barely spoke, but the silence felt different from the silence at dinner. This silence was shared. The library slowly became her favorite room, not because of the books, because of him. Nicholas followed a predictable pattern. Morning was for estate business, afternoon for reading, evening for writing. Genevieve began choosing the afternoon hours. Often they spent hours in the same room without speaking, but she watched him quietly. She noticed how easily he found books without searching. She noticed how his jaw tightened when letters arrived that displeased him. She noticed the way he sometimes stopped reading entirely and stared into the fire like a man carrying something heavy. One afternoon, she looked up from her book and found him watching her. Not casually, intently. When their eyes met, he did not immediately look away. The moment lasted longer than expected. Then he lowered his gaze back to his page. Genevieve's heart began beating faster. "Stop it," she told herself. "He simply looked at you." But she knew it had been more than that. Winter arrived early. The birch trees outside the window lost their final leaves. The sky turned pale and cold. One morning she sat near the drawing room window, sketching the bare trees when Nicholas spoke behind her. "You draw." She looked up. "I sketch," she corrected. "Drawing requires talent." "May I see?" She handed him the sketchbook. He studied it longer than she expected. "You notice the one that stands apart," he said. "Which one?" He pointed to the far left tree, the one she had spent the most time drawing. "It grows slightly away from the others," he said. "Most people would draw the line of trees." She looked down at the page. "I suppose I identify with it." The words slipped out before she could stop them. He looked at her. She looked back. Something opened quietly between them. "When did you begin sketching?" he asked. She told him about the fever she had as a girl, about the long weeks in her bedroom when she had drawn the wallpaper patterns simply to pass the time. He listened carefully. Actually listened. That surprised her. Later, she asked about the estate. He told her about the orchard he had replanted, about the cottages he repaired for the tenants, about the river he redirected after the spring floods. His voice changed when he spoke about the land, less guarded, more alive. Then one night, she discovered the room with the telescope. The door stood slightly open. Inside the room, the curtains had been pulled wide to reveal a sky filled with stars. A large telescope pointed toward the heavens. Nicholas sat beside it, studying a detailed map of the constellations. He looked different in the starlight, less controlled, more himself. "I am sorry," she said softly from the doorway. "I saw the light." He studied her. Then he said something unexpected. "Come and see." She stepped beside the telescope. He showed her Orion, Cassiopeia, a distant cloud of stars barely visible to the naked eye. Through the telescope, the universe looked endless. "It looks like smoke," she whispered. "It is a nebula," he said. "New stars being born." They stood together for nearly 2 hours studying the sky. Nicholas spoke more freely than she had ever heard. About mathematics, about light, about distance. "When I cannot sleep," he said quietly, "I come here." She understood that sentence held more meaning than he explained. "I used to walk the garden at night," she admitted. "At my parents' house." He nodded. "The stone bench beneath the wisteria arbor," he said. "It is very quiet there." Something warm moved through her chest. Later that night, she lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. "Do not do this," she warned herself. "Do not fall for him." But deep down, she already knew. It might be too late. The sound woke her in the middle of the night. It was not loud, not a crash, something sharper. A short breath forced through clenched teeth, followed by silence. Genevieve sat up slowly in bed. The fire in the grate had burned low, painting the ceiling with faint orange light. The house around her was completely quiet. For a moment, she thought she had imagined it. Then she heard it again. She was out of bed immediately. She pulled a robe over her nightdress and stepped into the corridor. Moonlight spilled through the tall window at the end of the hall, and there, 20 feet away, Nicholas's chair lay on its side. Nicholas himself was on the floor beside it. He had clearly been returning from the observatory room. The chair had tipped during the transfer. Genevieve did not run. She walked calmly across the corridor and knelt beside him. His face was pale with pain, his jaw clenched tight. When his eyes lifted to meet hers, she saw something in them that surprised her. Not anger. Shame. "Muscle spasm?" she asked gently. He nodded once. "Lower back." "I see." She stood and righted the chair. Then she placed it beside him. He did not ask for help. She did not offer it. Instead, she held the chair steady while he pulled himself back into the seat. The process took a moment. When he was settled again, his breathing slowly steadied. Genevieve sat down on the floor beside him, not hovering over him, not retreating, just sitting. "You should return to bed," he said quietly. "In a moment." Silence filled the corridor. "I am not an invalid," he said suddenly. "I know." She said it simply. "You are a man who had a muscle spasm and fell. That happens to people." He looked down at her for a long moment. "You are not what I expected," he said. "Nor are you." The moonlight shifted slightly through the window. After a while, he spoke again. "The spasms began after the injury." She said nothing. "They were worse in the first year." "My mother was ill for many years," Genevieve said softly. "Bodies change their rules." He studied her. "I did not know that. There is much we do not know about each other yet." He heard the word yet. When she finally stood to return to her room, he stopped her quietly. "Thank you." She hesitated. Then she said something she had not said before. "Good night, Nicholas." He did not correct her. Winter deepened across Somerset. December arrived with frost and pale skies. Something between them had changed, not dramatically, but the distance that once filled every room had softened. They spoke more in the library. Sometimes he read passages aloud from books that interested him. Sometimes she showed him her sketches. The quiet afternoons together became something they both looked forward to. Then the letter arrived. Genevieve did not see it, but she saw what it did to him. At breakfast, he was silent. Not his usual calm silence, a colder silence. That afternoon, the library door remained closed. The next day, it was closed again. 3 days passed without seeing him. On the 4th day, he came to the greenhouse. Genevieve was tending the orchids when the door opened. Nicholas stopped in the center of the room. "I owe you an explanation. You owe me nothing." Genevieve. Her name and his voice stopped her from saying more. "The letter was from my solicitor in London." She waited. "The title and estate will pass to my cousin Edmund if I die without an heir." His hands rested tightly on the wheels of his chair. "Edmund is not a good man. He cares nothing for the land or the tenants." She understood immediately. "He believes this marriage is temporary." Nicholas nodded. "He has begun spreading rumors in London, suggesting our marriage is an arrangement." Silence filled the warm greenhouse. "I see. There is no legal challenge," Nicholas said quickly. "The marriage is valid. But society will gossip." "Yes." He looked at her then. "You may not wish to remain part of that." Genevieve held his gaze calmly. "I am not leaving." His expression tightened. "You do not understand what you are agreeing to." "Perhaps not," she said quietly. "But I know one thing." She stepped closer. "You are worth staying for." The words seemed to hit him like a sudden wind. For a moment, the careful control in his eyes cracked. Genevieve reached forward slowly and placed her hand over his on the wheel of the chair. He turned his hand beneath hers and held it. Neither of them spoke. The greenhouse remained quiet around them. Outside, the sky had turned the color of pewter, and winter rain tapped softly against the glass. For the first time since their marriage began, they simply stood together. 3 days before Christmas, Genevieve packed a small bag. Not because she planned to leave, but because she had overheard something she was never meant to hear. She had been sitting quietly in the library when Nicholas entered with a London barrister. The conversation that followed changed everything. "The marriage is legally sound," the lawyer said. "Edmund cannot challenge it." Nicholas's voice remained calm. "Then the matter is finished." "Not entirely. He plans to attack the marriage socially, suggesting it lacks substance." A long silence followed. "If Lady Genevieve were willing to make a public statement—" "No," Nicholas cut him off immediately. "My wife will not be used to protect my reputation." "Your Grace, it would settle the matter entirely." I said no. The fire crackled in the silence that followed. "She deserves better than what I have given her," Nicholas said quietly. "I will not ask her to defend me." Genevieve sat frozen in the window seat. Her heart pounded painfully. He had said it when he believed she was not listening. She deserves better. That afternoon she left Windrest Hall. But 12 miles down the road, realization struck her like lightning. He would read her note and think she had left him. He would believe he had driven her away. "Stop the carriage," she said suddenly. "My lady?" "Turn back." She returned to Windrest Hall just before sunset. The house was silent. The library door was closed. She opened it. Nicholas stood by the window. When he turned and saw her, the look on his face stopped her breath. For 1 second, there was devastation. Then, relief. She crossed the room, I heard you, she said quietly. 3 days ago, in the library. His jaw tightened. You deserve better than what I have given you, she repeated. You are not a burden, she said firmly. You are the man who grows orchids in the greenhouse. The man who showed me the stars. The man who sat on the floor beside me at 2 a.m. Her voice softened. Something has grown here, Nicholas. He stared at her, completely unguarded. His hand lifted slowly. His fingers touched her cheek. I do not know how to be what you deserve, he said. You already are. She leaned forward until her forehead rested gently against his. They stood that way in the quiet library, two people who had spent months carefully circling each other, finally letting the walls fall. Christmas came quietly to Windrest Hall. Greenery appeared along the staircase. Holly decorated the mantelpieces. For the first time in years, laughter drifted through the hallways. On Christmas morning, Genevieve found a small gift on her desk, a book wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a celestial atlas. Old, beautiful. On the first page, Nicholas had written 4 words. So, you can look. She carried the book to the greenhouse. Nicholas stood beside the orchid bench. When she showed him the atlas, something warm passed across his face. They stood together looking at the orchids. One of them had grown a new bud. It will bloom in January, Nicholas said. You brought it back. It was not entirely gone. She looked at him. He was speaking about more than a flower. I have been thinking about spring, he said. The south garden has been empty for years. He paused. I thought perhaps you might like to plant something there. Genevieve smiled softly. I would like that very much. He looked at her steadily. I cannot promise everything will be easy. I know. She took his hand. I am still here. His fingers closed around hers. I know, he said. That night, she stood by her bedroom window, looking down at the gardens of Windrest Hall. In the west wing, a familiar light burned. She had watched that light since the first night she arrived, at first with curiosity, then concern. Now with something warmer. Below her, the curtain shifted slightly, as if he knew she was watching. She did not step away. She let him see her standing there. The winter stars stretched endlessly above the estate, and for the first time since the war, Windrest Hall no longer felt like a house holding its breath. It felt like a place where something new had begun. She had come expecting a monster. Instead, she found a man who had forgotten how to hope, and she stayed long enough to watch him remember.